Oh, nice play. Oh, hey everybody. It's the Commodore from the Clan of the Grey Wolf, and you are watching the weekly Wringer series here on clanofthegreywolf.com. You've actually just caught me right in the middle of a football game. Really glad to be back in full swing with the football season here in the States. Very excited, catching football fever for sure. Got a lot going on today. We have to wrap up last week's question, which was exceedingly popular. Had a tremendous number of commenters. I'm going to have to try to ignore the game now. Some tremendous contributions from the community. Lots of great comments about the most important PlayStation 1 game of all time. We're going to go and get really in deep with all of that. While we're also going to, I'll also give you my thoughts on the matter as well as I always do. And try to talk about some of the things that you guys brought up within some of the comments that might not have been completely pertinent to what the question was, but as always, we're going to try to pull some of that stuff in as well. And then I'm going to ask you a question that I think is reflective of some of the trends we're seeing in technology about how you'll be using your PC or your computer moving forward in the future. So, first thing I want to do is welcome some new folks, and folks, I want you to understand, the Weekly Wringer has been around for about 3/4 of a year now, and I only started, I did start welcoming people fairly early on, but I'm doing it all from memory. So if I missed some folks, please let me know, and if I repeat you and welcome you in 2 episodes, it's not because I'm just brain dead, it's because obviously I shoot this in my spare time, and it's a little bit arduous to go back and check every single post. So, so I apologize for that if I mentioned it. But anyway, here's the people that appeared new to me as of the posting this week. First, I want to say welcome to DTX180. Welcome, welcome. And then there is the mysteriously named, and I'm going to go with the French pronunciation, Lenoir, as opposed to Lenois. Could be either, I suppose. Maybe, Illinois, Illinois, whatever you like. Varcraft as well, welcome, and the Conthusiast as well. Welcome to all of you. Great to have you with the community, and many of you had, actually all of you had some really great stuff to offer this week, and always love to see when somebody is actually inspired by the question we asked to really start posting. So we love to see that moving forward. Now, time to really settle in and talk about the question from last week, which got you all very excited, I could tell. Seems that we all have some deeply rooted memories of the PlayStation 1, and justifiably so. It's a fantastic platform. Really, in many ways, it was responsible for a lot of my excitement about getting into video gaming in general, even though I have been well established with a couple of other systems. And I think it really helped to define an entire generation. But the question was not necessarily about the PlayStation 1 per se, it was about the games. And as you recall, I asked you about what the most important game of the PlayStation 1 really was. Now, I made the mistake of saying era when I asked the question in the Wringer, but then I quickly recanted and said, I want to keep this to the PlayStation only and not just the PlayStation era. The reason why is because I like having that laser focus. It allows us to kind of really talk about an issue and cover it extensively. And you guys definitely did that. So let's jump right in. What I'm going to do here is try to stay away from the individual commenters that might have brought up all the different points about a game, and I'm going to stick with the person that might have mentioned it first so that I can mention the games. So there's a lot going on here. If you talked about a game in depth and then I talk about your ideas and I don't mention your name, don't be offended. It means I probably read exactly what you said and kind of loved that idea and kept with it. I'm just mentioning the people that brought things to the attention of the community first. First off, Mr. K, who, I don't know if the rumors are true, but if they are, happy birthday, Mr. K, from the Commodore to you. And Mr. K brought up probably what I think would be the resounding theme of this week's Wringer, and that is that Final Fantasy VII is the most important game of the PlayStation 1 era. Obviously, there are so many different reasons. One, because of the nature of RPGs and how those took off in America, in the largest video game market in the world, took off the concept of the JRPG, and really RPGs in video games in general, although there were some successes here and there, they were few and far in between. It was still a niche, and that definitely is a contribution of Final Fantasy VII. Final Fantasy VII also was a tremendous success in terms of really opening up the sales of the PlayStation and creating an atmosphere that is more friendly toward video gaming in general for the general population here in America, at least. And I know certainly in European markets, Canada I'm sure as well. But it really did kind of open that door that a lot of other games walk through, which makes it very important. And you notice in the question, I didn't define what importance was. And you guys had a lot of different opinions about that. But for right now, I'm just going to play with what you guys have said, and hopefully you can kind of intuit what my thoughts are about a game's importance as we move along. That's an important thing to note. So, with Final Fantasy VII, we have so many different things going on. For a fully 3D RPG with really very pretty 3D, pre-rendered 3D cutscenes. We have just a tremendous soundtrack from Nobuo Uematsu, who was already well established in many of the previous games for the Final Fantasy series, and otherwise, also with his work in Chrono Trigger, so on and so forth. But I think it can be argued that his magnum opus, in terms of really composition and execution, was Final Fantasy VII. There are so many great pieces of music in other games, but the limitations of, say, the Super Nintendo sound chip versus the full complement of audio on the PlayStation definitely limited it. So, with all those the combination of things coming together with Final Fantasy VII, I think it's hard to argue that it was the most influential game on the PlayStation 1. Indeed, it is the only reason that someone like me, or even Rue, who at the time were probably both pretty hard Nintendo fans and really couldn't imagine the idea of picking up a Sony box whatsoever, made it a point to go actively seek out a PlayStation owned by one of our friends just to be able to play the game. And so that of course opened the floodgates for me, and at that point I had to have a PlayStation. So you can make an argument that the only reason I even owned a PS1 was because of Final Fantasy VII, and I dare say that many of you probably could say exactly the same thing. If that isn't importance, I don't know what is. Now I want to go to Shirao Wolf, who had many contributions. I guess I should have stuck just to what the singular contribution of what they thought the most important game was. But in any case, I went with the first mention theory, as I talked about before. Number one, Castlevania Symphony of the Night. Now this game is intriguingly on this list, and I think it absolutely belongs there in the conversation. Here's why. I know it's a 2D game. I know that it is mostly just an advanced platformer with a kind of exploration feel, otherwise known as the Metroidvania, right? So it really builds upon an established formula and does it in a way that might not be altogether completely different from previous installments of said genre. However, Castlevania Symphony of the Night made a very important statement at a very pivotal time in video gaming history. At the moment, those of us that were gaming really heavily at the time understand very much that the world was consumed with the idea of having 3D games. If you didn't have a 3D game, the thought was you couldn't have a hit. Castlevania Symphony of the Night made the point that you could still make a 2D game that looked really great, really the apex of what graphics would have been in the previous generation, and also a bit beyond, because we all know there were a lot of effects in Symphony of the Night that simply the Super Nintendo was just not capable of. Then you take that and you combine it with the music and the capabilities of the PlayStation, and really having recorded soundtracks that were worthy of Hollywood cinema. Now, you can look back at Symphony of the Night and say, well, I'm not sure I'd see that in a Hollywood movie. You're probably right, but it was there on the threshold. And in any case, I would say that that specific concept and idea is still remnant today in every video game that is more of a best of breed from the last generation kind of a game. Think Mega Man 9, right? and we've talked about this at length in The Ringer before, Castlevania Symphony of the Night does a tremendous job of opening the door to say you don't have to have the biggest, baddest game in terms of pushing the envelope in graphics, in 3D, in whatever, polygon counts, in order to be a fantastic game with a great experience and to sell a lot of units. In Castlevania Symphony of the Night, worthily so, sold a lot of units. So I think that's got to be in the conversation. Also, Shira Wolf mentioned Resident Evil, another thing that got echoed many, many times over. Resident Evil defines the survival horror genre in a way that I think is absolutely game-changing. Now, the voice acting is horrible. I don't need to get into that. You all know that drill very well. But at the same time, it absolutely creates an experience that is fundamentally different than anything I had played to that point. Now, I'm not saying, for example, play Alone in the Dark on PC. If we go and look at Alone in the Dark on PC way back in the day, this is probably 4 or 5 years before Resident Evil Director's Cut for PlayStation, or even the original Resident Evil, before it got the Director's Cut. And it's pretty easy to see that there's a great concept with Alone in the Dark that can't really get there. There's an important divergence at this particular point in time, which I'll talk about the other diversion in just a moment. But part of the fulfillment of the form of Alone in the Dark is really fulfilled by Resident Evil. And it does it in a way that I thought was so well implemented. It's not about a ton of ammo. It's not about just wasting away every single zombie that walks around the corner. The story was extremely good. The mystery was a part of all of it. And it really is wrapped inside this tight package of, doing this exploratory mansion thing. And I just thought that was a game that you could turn the lights off and legitimately be scared about many, many times throughout the game. But it also happened to be a fantastic action game at the same time. Something I think gets brought to a head in Resident Evil 4. And as those of you that know the Weekly Ringer know that I'm a huge fan of that game. Also mentioned by Shira Wolf was Metal Gear Solid, which became the point of major contention for the rest of the. Actually, I should say, right off the bat, everyone knows it's worthy of mention. So that wasn't what was contended. What was contended is probably the extent of the influence and also the nomenclature of the game, which I thought was fairly interesting. I'm not sure we've had that conversation before in the Weekly Ringer, but in any case, Metal Gear Solid absolutely belongs there, and for so many reasons that you guys covered. And I think it belongs in the echelon of some of the best games ever, not just on the original PlayStation. But I really, really enjoyed that game for so many reasons that you guys mentioned. The stealth was there, the action, the attempt to really bring the storyline out into different, methodologies with, with everything from having different kinds of, tapping fits, that were kind of built into the real-time moments, which now are a staple of most action games, and survival horror, all these kinds of things brought together. And I just felt like it was such a great, fulfillment of the form of the original Metal Gear that it's almost unavoidable. And they did such a tremendous job in developing that game. Very, very clean, very seamless. Maybe the graphics weren't 100% amazing, but they certainly were awesome back then, and I think it absolutely warrants mention here. And I'll be honest with you, I have not completely played a Metal Gear since Metal Gear Solid. It was just now maybe that you can make an argument that has to do with time, but Metal Gear Solid was just too good to put down, and I'm not sure any of the other ones were. Forgive me if I'm misspeaking there. Here's the other divergence, and Lando covered this. The other divergence in the fulfillment of the form of Alone in the Dark really becomes Silent Hill. Silent Hill is a tremendous game that really, unlike Resident Evil, which is supposed to be kind of an action game that surprises you every couple moments and gives you that sense of really suspension and difficulty and, in terms of ammo and all these kinds of things, shortage of ammo and just being kind of scared. Silent Hill takes a very different approach. It's something that's very eerie and very difficult to handle all the way through. It's supposed to be this setting that is just unavoidably creepy and scary. And I think it does a tremendous job of doing that. Silent Hill really is the completion of form of Alone in the Dark. And I think Silent Hill for the PlayStation 1 completely redefined a 3D experience of being able to be submerged into this world that was just altogether ridiculously scary. And it did it in a way that I'm not sure has been replicated well since then.